conversation regarding social media's influence with regards to our political discourse and our democracy. This platform will allow us to get expert conversations from our experts who know more about social media's influence. Regenesis is a higher education institution that is here to champion the aspects of knowledge, and we have decided to host this webinar to introduce this conversation, just trying to find out what kind of influence social media has with regards to what we're seeing each and every day with AI, with Twitter or X as it is known today, with regards to digital knowledge, with regards to how that influences um, our mainstream media, with what also has been happening with traditional media versus social media, and many other conversations that our experts will help us in trying to navigate and finding out what we can learn from all of this. As a higher education institution, knowledge is what we champion. So I'll ask you, students, and anyone who has joined outside the avenue of being a student, just to ask questions. I would also advise you guys to make any comments if you feel like making any comments. And let's not shy away of finding out about where we need to go as South Africans, what we need to be knowledge about going forward, especially since the elections are coming in a couple of months, we could say, or next year, and how that can be influenced by social media as well. So, without taking much of your time, I will give a platform to the speakers today to kindly introduce themselves to you guys, tell you more about themselves, the work that they've done, and how or why they're here today. Thank you very much. I'll start with you, Sandy Siwe. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sanelisiwe Owechuntabeni. I am the social media coordinator for the City of Cape Town. My work involves obviously not only creating content for residences, but also our metro is kind of like a very into the political playground. So we generally not only do external communications for our residences on the platform, we also find ways that we can assist them in any service related matters or any other matters that they would like to find out. We curate our content specifically for Capetonians. And we also make sure that we don't exclude upcoming ratepayers. We also speak to the existing ratepayers as well. So it's kind of like showcasing the city holistically on our end. When it comes to politics, we do have a leading party. However, that does not infiltrate the work that we do. That's just my work side. And then for me, I am currently a master's student in political science, which is completely different to what I do on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the engagement and to obviously kind of like grow the conversation about social media, especially in the South African context. It's one of those things where we think social media is just about trending online, but there's a deeper dive and more to social media than just trends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy Siwe. William, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm the director of an organization called Media Monitoring Africa. We've been going for 30-something years. The last few years, we've been doing a lot of work in many of these related areas. I get to work. I have the pleasure of working with some of you. And good, solid friends and colleagues of the South African Human Rights Commission. One of the links I'm going to post shortly will be they did these excellent social media guidelines, which I'll put in the chat just so that everyone can reference. And I'll also be sharing a document that we released fairly recently as part of the Media 20 series, which deals specifically with a number of the kind of issues, and I want to share that because even though it's targeted at the G20 kind of ideas, it deals very much with these issues, and it's relevant because, of course, these are not just local issues; they are global challenges that we're facing. we see at the moment, just when we thought that the worst presidents could emerge from any of the so-called developing nations, one of the most developed happens to have a man who lies continuously. In fact, he lies more than he actually says anything that's of any value or accuracy in his speeches. If you saw his recent pronouncements at the UN, his speech before the UN General Assembly, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. And this sort of intersection, he's a man who's kind of engineered and built for social media. In fact, I'm not sure he's got any other value or purpose at all. And that you've got a person who interacts with social media, who also happens to be one of the preeminent leaders of the world, and that has a particularly important impact on social media and the information that we receive and how we deal with many of the online challenges, from hate speech to harassment, and of course mis and disinformation. So we've also got some cool tools that I'll also put some links in the chat. But lovely to be with you. I'll be quiet. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, William. And we will touch a bit on that as well, and its influence, social media influences on politics, not just in South Africa, but also globally as well, and how it affects the global economy as well, since it has also been a topic of conversation that affects South Africa to a certain extent. Thank you very much for your input, sir. Zinyiwe, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Quite excited to be here, William. You make it quite difficult to introduce myself after all of that, but I'll try my best. So my name is Zinyiwe Ntatisiya-Sore. I've been playing around in the ICT space, internet governance, data protection, cybersecurity, and digital economy for a couple of years now, just over 10 years. I think, William, we've met a few times. And yeah, I'm quite excited to be on this platform to discuss this important topic. Maybe for background purposes, outside of the social media space, I am currently the Vice President and Head of Public Policy for a company headed out of the UAE, out of Dubai. And we look at a plethora of digital services, so everyday digital services, and we integrate that into everyday lives. So we are in South America, UAE, Asia, Europe, and in Africa, we're in 14 markets. So I oversee those 14 markets. And I think it's quite interesting having this discussion from a South African lens, having the experience across Frontier Africa. But on the social media side, I've been doing quite a bit of commentary for our national radio and television stations around low satellite orbits, access to internet, and really the development of algorithmic bias on X, looking at the integration of rights and sometimes the lack of rights on our social media platforms. So I'm quite excited to hear what my colleagues have to say, and I think it's going to be quite a robust discussion with the introduction that just came just before me. But thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much, Zinyiwe. Doug, how are you? I hope you're well. Could you kindly also introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen. I'm from the South African Human Rights Commission. I come wholly from a rights-based perspective into this conversation, but also from a very practical point of view. So the Human Rights Commission and my role specifically, we have deep dived into digital rights and the digital rights space in the past few years. And we come from an accountability point of view. Anything that happens offline and happening online, all of those abuses for us, we speak from a rights-based foundation. And it's a very important discussion that we need to have and we need to increasingly have. I'm currently in Windhoek at GIF Africa, where from a regional perspective, we are also looking at the effects of social media, effects of disinformation on the continent, and what are we going to do about it? Yesterday, there was a comment to say that the AI and the developing technology train has left, and it is our decision whether we are going to be on the sidelines? Are we going to be passengers, or are we going to, in fact, be driving and conducting this train? So a very important discussion to have. William is a very trusted partner of the Human Rights Commission, and with a lot of partners, we do try and mobilize, not only in respect of promoting human rights on these digital platforms, but also protecting rights. And throughout the conversation, I will give you a few examples of how we do that. A few of them have been very, very big in the media as well, but for us, it's accountability in terms of the legal frameworks that we need to not only promote, but we need to realize. So obviously a very important discussion for us, but always in view of the duties that I have at the Human Rights Commission, we will always reflect and build it from the Bill of Rights. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Doug. And I was there when that contract was signed, so I know about the some of the things that you hopefully be speaking about that were mentioned in that whole charter and the work with the IEC that you have been doing. So first things first, if I can start with you, Sangeli Siwe, coming from a political point of view, in what ways do you think that social media has influenced our political discourse, both positively and negatively?
I definitely say that whatever happens online in the conversations that happen, either pro or anti-political party, does not affect how people vote. A lot of political parties tend to think that, whatever polls they create and whatever else, that will translate into votes. The EFF is definitely one of the biggest parties that assume that because they get an online support or people are having the conversations, they assume that this will translate into votes, and they got the biggest shock and a hard reality in the previous elections that we've had. I can say that we're finding, for instance, online, more youth involvement in politics, whereby it's a more collective type of thing where the youth are saying we cannot keep making the same mistakes that our parents have made when it comes to the pattern of voting. In order for us to effect the change that we want to see in society, we need to remove the current party, in the country, and vote for somebody else that can change the status quo that, the youth-based challenges that they have. So it's a good thing that the youth are utilizing social media platforms to engage when it comes to politics. It's also a good thing that they can actually engage directly with politicians who have put themselves online and have put themselves at the forefront to be communication pieces for their political organizations. So it brings a level of accountability as well, which is a good thing. We saw what happened to Gayton McKenzie, where his previous posts came out into the light, and people are like, but you also need to be accountable for the things that you've also said online. So the standard to which our parents, so to speak, held, politicians is now what the youth is currently doing with actual, where there's more accountability that the youth is calling for, in contrast to, I'm voting for, Mandela, I'm voting for this thing and whatever else. The negative, I would say, would be that it is also now showing a high level of when it comes to the voting system itself. The youth and most people who are actually online are starting to have a distrust in the IEC. They're finding out that things with ballots are being stolen and all of these things and whatever else. I mean, Nkwanazi is the biggest thing right now that everybody's talking about and what's been happening there. So it's building a major distrust when it comes to the system and the laws that are put in place as well. And lastly, I could definitely say that it's a good thing that we've got social media as a tool of, finding out news or being educated or informed in terms of our current political climate. And it's also a good thing that we can also hold those in leadership accountable on those platforms as well.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my cursor there for a minute. If I can bring you, Zanyiwe, more on the social media negatives to a certain extent, looking at the aspect of algorithms that you'd find, you'd be searching for a new sneaker maybe somewhere on Superbalist, and automatically you would see it on your timeline when you're looking at your either TikTok or anything on your social media, should we be scared? Should we be nervous? Is it the what we keep seeing on television that technology will one day take over with your Terminators and all of this? Or are we being maybe to a certain extent paranoid about what is happening in front of us?
Can you hear me? Yes. Fantastic.
Yes.
Great. The reality is that it brings extraordinary opportunities, right? I mean, if you think about it, there's technology developing, so there's definitely a positive side to it. So if I think about, for instance, from, you've just said now, you go online and you've been chatting about a sneaker, gives you access to a bunch of things. But when you look at privacy and you look at just like psychologically what it does to you, are you asking yourself, is there a big brother watching me? Is there, what else of my conversations are being listened to? So there's definitely an element of, yes, technology is advancing and we've got more digital nomads in this entire, sort of ecosystem growing. But if we go back to basics, have you consented for this desire of yours to be looked out for? Have you consented for your conversation to be looked out for? And I mean, I'll use a simple example with Siri, for instance. A lot of us put our Siri on and we say we want this AI assistance, etc. We scroll through the T's and C's and we say, great, we want this, and it creates efficiency in our lives. But what we also do forget is that by doing that, we're essentially consenting to our conversations, to Siri, sort of like, you say certain things and it's on, and it will ask you, do you want it to be on in the background? And do you say yes to that? Do you say no to that? Do you change those settings? Do you opt out? So it really, I think your question, before even going deep into algorithmic bias and just looking at the creepiness that comes with the evasion of your privacy, is, are we actually being accountable and responsible? Number one. But number two, do we know what to look out for? To invoke that accountability, to show that responsibility, because I genuinely do not believe that we've got, let's say, a population with people who are just generally irresponsible. I think the manner in which we have started using technology and the manner in which technology has been embedded, not just in South Africa, but society at large, has been quite irresponsible by, big tech, by the technology companies, even our own ICT companies and providers of network and data itself. And I go back to the days where I was sitting on the ICASA Consumer Advisory Panel, and we would ask some of the questions that you asked. Do you know XYZ? Do you know that you can opt in? Are you okay? It's something simple. Someone will ask, my airtime has been used for XYZ, and when you check the person's phone, they opted into certain games or certain subscriptions, etc. But it's not accessible for the common person to understand what it is that they're opting into. The language is not approachable. The language is not even a South African language that the majority of the people use. So if you go into those small nuances about just technology at a surface level, there are issues. Now you're going into algorithms. How do you explain to a person who is getting their airtime eaten by a subscription for a ringtone that, you've actually opted into this particular service? So I think before we go into deep dive into that, it's really about the accountability. Now, yes. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. It's just sneezing. It's that change of season. So to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. Okay, no worry. I think you and I are twins in that regard. But just going back to that, misinformation and manipulation, for instance, is a real thing. If you go to the elections, for instance, fake polling results circulated wildly on WhatsApp, and this undermined public trust. And then you look at the algorithms, right? So you see one video like that, and it sees that you've completed the entire video. Then you start seeing more and more of those videos. So when you look at manipulated content, you see that it spreads faster than institutions can respond. And we've got, really, obviously, we've got like the Human Rights Charter on social media. But the real question is, if it's an opt-in, how do you ensure that, people actually opt in? You can't force them, right? I think now the negative is the toxicity and harassment that exists. For instance, I sit on the African Women's Leadership Network. It's a UN and AU body that looks at achieving SDGs and women's rights across the continent, and just a network of leaders, young and old, where we come together and try and have these discussions economically, politically, women living in rural areas, etc. And when it comes to this, the UN a Women Human Study found that female leaders across Africa are silenced, not by critique of their policies, but by orchestrated campaigns of harassment, often sexualized. This doesn't happen to men, it happens to women. And this directly undermines Section 9 of our Constitution, for instance, equality, dignity. And this is algorithms being used to literally push these agendas, algorithms being used to silence women. And these, this just doesn't make sense in this 2025 that we live in. And if you look at the SADC Gender Protocol, it speaks about the same thing. And it really, it pushes us in society to look at this type of online abuse as a broader subset of gender-based violence. And I would also say polarization would be a negative, right? When algorithms feed people more of what they really believe in, it creates echo chambers where people it becomes disastrous. For instance, I work in Zambia quite a bit, and we were watching the elections there, trying to see how that would impact business. And the 2021 heated elections showed how social media platforms, Facebook, TikTok was being used, and there were targeted ads that was sort of pushing certain agendas out there, and it was radicalizing debates instead of broadening them, undermining, the spirit of freedom of expression and free flow of information. Because what you're essentially doing is you're planting seeds and really taking away robust conversations that people really need when it comes to constitutionalism. So where does this leave us, right? I'll finish this now. So from a policy perspective, and the social media charter is really instructive. It insists that while free expression is essential and fundamental, it must be exercised in a way that protects dignity, equality, and accountability. And from a private sector perspective, the stakes are also high. I mean, in 2023, several South African brands were dragged in political controversies, right? Online and offline, but through disinformation campaigns. And it shows how toxic discourse doesn't just harm democracy, but also destabilizes business and just revenue generation in countries and confidence and market trust. So what does good look like? I think governments need to establish transparent electoral protocols where political content and just content generally, especially from an algorithmic perspective, can be addressed. And platforms also investing in that local content, ensuring that people know what they're doing when they're going onto these platforms. And I would also say specific protections, for women, for vulnerable groups, youth, people who attacked and get silenced, and they marginalize people, and it just gets worse by online. And I think for the likes of us, citizens being prepared to demand for these platforms, big tech, for the ICT providers to do their part in literacy programs and free ones. I'm not even talking about things that people should pay. They should get providers and say, look, you're using our platforms, we're exposing you to this kind of risk. There's so many implications, physical even, and we need to do something about it. And for citizens like you and I to request for that. So this really would equip people to use online platforms that's grounded in fact. We'd be able to ask questions. We'd be able to cross-examinate, in anything that's thrown our way. And the ability to do so stops people from being manipulated. So that's my little bit there. I'll stop.
Thank you for that. And I see what you are speaking about also brings in a bit of what William was speaking onto with the influence of the global community as a whole. And if I can bring him in here to the conversation itself and the aspect of planting seeds, the conversation of the market trust algorithms, digital mining to its full extent as well. Sometimes it's simple and naive for someone to go into a restaurant and just ask for a Wi-Fi password just to send a simple text, but you are sometimes in turn exposing yourself and what is in your device. So, William, if I can just ask from your perspective, in the global sphere, do you think that these things, your algorithms, your digital mining, your all this tech, does have actual influence on the developing states? I know for the developed states, we can argue, and we've seen, as you were explaining in the beginning, that we've seen leaders winning elections based on digital. What's the social media aspects and all of that. But in the aspect of a developed state, where we are as South Africans, should we be worried or we are still far?
No, I mean, we should be profoundly worried. I mean, I think the basic point of departure is that these generally large social media entities are there for profit and for maximization of profit. The rule always is if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? There's a very good reason why Meta offers us all of these things and Google offers us all of these things for free and makes them seem like they're impossible not to have, whether it's Instagram or whether it's TikTok or X even, although fortunately there's people on X ever since it's been taken over by yet another lunatic and horrific South African export, I might add. But the point is that as a goal where the aim is solely to drive profits, what we've seen on any number of occasions is that the kinds of protections and the same kinds of standards that are afforded to people in so-called developed nations, or more likely if you look at Western Europe, because they're a lot further ahead in regulating some of these things, the kind of protections that are afforded to people, access to their data, making sure that their data is actually stored and retained in the country where they live, or at least within Europe, for example, whereas our data, very little of it is stored here, much of it is stored in data centers around the world. We have no idea where it is. Generally, you have very little idea of what happens to your information. So we're at far greater risk, actually, than any of these so-called developed nations, because they don't give us the same risks, the same protections. They do that for our young people, and of course they do it in relation to women. And then you look at the way and the standards and the way that they apply or fail to apply their own community standards, because far fewer resources. In fairness, in South Africa, we're a much smaller market, for example, than the USA. But it means that they don't and aren't able to track and address things in a lot of our African languages, not just locally in South Africa, but throughout the continent, which means that people can get away and do get away with a lot of things in African languages because their algorithms aren't trained on it, or they aren't made aware that these are the kinds of issues. So from small scale kinds of issues to large scale ability to attack and target us for the most extraordinary kinds of things. I'm not sure if you go on Meta, the number of adverts that you get exposed to, how many of those are actually real and legitimate and credible, or most of them are just spam and scam things that are there to take away your money and see you being scammed out of your funds, right? And that's the intersection of bad quality information with cybercrime. These things, the way that they've kind of been governed or failed to be governed, have really opened up a can of worms, have facilitated and continue to facilitate actively and in the most extraordinary manner the deepest kind of polarization of our world that we've seen. If you look at what's happened in the States with the rise of the authoritarians and people that generally hate the ideas. They talk about what diversity, equality, and inclusion as though these are swear words. These are not swear words in our context. These are things that are basic elements of our constitution and our constitutional framework. Yet, if you go online, the sense that you get is that it's anything goes, because what it does is it's emboldened the extreme right to be able to harness the algorithms which favor all of the worst things that we have to offer. These things have driven this idea of, by and large, these platforms being there as cesspits of the most extraordinary and awful and revolting kind, which in turn serves to embolden those who seek to pursue and carry on those things. Which isn't to say that there aren't a lot of really good and excellent accounts on social media, or that there isn't a lot of really good things. Of course there is. But those aren't the things that gain the traction, and those aren't the things that are there. What we've got at the moment is data being used and people being actively incentivized and rewarded for spreading misogyny, hate, racism, and all the kind of things that undermine our society that we are trying to build. So, on balance, if you look at those things, these are not the kinds of tools that we're consistently being told they're there to help you and they're there to help find good products. We don't need help finding good products or to spend our money. We need help building our society and trying to save our damn world. It's not a surprise that you look at the issue of climate disinformation. I mean, you had Donald Trump standing up calling it the biggest scam ever. I mean, the man is completely and utterly deranged. And because of his significant level of power, far too few leaders are willing to stand up to him, because we knows that when you stand up to the school bully, he's going to come with his big friends and he's going to hit you. Only now we're dealing with a global scale. And in this instance, the school bully is Donald Trump and his friends that aid and abet him on many of the social media platforms.
Thank you there. Doc, can I bring you in, Dr. Ellen? With regards to the South African Human Rights Commission, I'm sure maybe you have noticed there's a form of discrimination when voter education comes in via social media. Those who have access to it, those who do not have access to it. To what extent have you tried to make sure that the things that we find on social media are facts? Number one, there's accountability. Number two, that has been taken into account. Proper transparency. As William is speaking about now about bots as well, you find that Julius maybe, or even your Donald Trump, not to just name names, but you find that there's someone who's using a certain account, but it's not the person in the background, or it's a robot in the background that is using that. So to what extent, as the South African Human Rights Commission, have you tried to go in making sure that, number one, there's proper political education out there, and also the issues of transparency and accountability are taken into account?
Thank you so much. I think let me first make a comment on what my fellow panelists have said about where we find ourselves in terms of social media platforms. The fault lines are as a result of design, unfortunately. When we started seeing the big boom of social media, it was designed in a manner where we almost co-opted a language that should have never developed for the purpose of big tech. Now, what do I mean with that? We are currently speaking, even when we speak about AI, when we speak about disinformation, when we speak about data mining, we're speaking about language that's being used that is not what we developed when we developed human rights principles. We're speaking about bias. Now, in South Africa, if you say bias, we've really popularized this term bias. But in actual fact, bias is discrimination. When you speak about human rights, you speak about discrimination, not bias. You speak about these opaque terminology when we address matters related to social media companies or big tech, and currently when you speak about AI. But it is developed as a result of an intentional need to stay opaque. Because if there's no transparency, if there's no understanding from the user side, you cannot demand redress, you cannot demand regulation, you cannot demand anything that would assist you in having a tool to hold someone or a company to account. So we have designed it. It started with it was designed with social media companies to create this environment where they make the populace feel powerless, because we do not understand what is happening at the back end, and they've kept it like that. Now it has come and it's spilled over into the AI development scenario now, and we are just continuing because we speak about now AI and ethics. Now, ethics is a moving target. For some reason, again, we co-opted a language that should have never been used. We should have said AI and human rights, because what do I mean about that? Human rights is a binding concept. When you speak about ratification of international standards, the international agreements, whether it's the ICCPR, whether it's the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we've got global agreement on these principles. But suddenly big tech came in, social media companies came in, and we co-opted a language that is using self-regulation instead of binding legal principles for accountability. So we've created this monster, and now we're asking, how do we make it to account if there's no binding framework? If we kept on being convinced that for the benefit of innovation in Africa, the benefit of development, we should steer away from regulation. If you want to keep your audience awake after a lunchtime, in any session or any panel, all words that you need to use when there's private companies in the room is regulation, and everybody would sit up. Because it's the buzzword. They are so scared of this word because we've been able to almost disillusion governments, disillusion communities to say that you need us more than we need you. And that is, in fact, absolutely untrue. By 2030, 75% of youth will come from Africa. But currently, we are being convinced that we should only be receiving the benefit of this, what they call innovation. Now, innovation without regulation, without safeguard, is exploitation. And that is where we are seeing that now in respect of the legacy that social media is leaving us with. Now, what is that legacy? Yes, it has amplified the right to participate in these public discourses, the right to have your views being heard. But I want to comment on what Sanelisiwe has said and Zaniwe has said and what William has said. It is an echo chamber of those who scream the loudest. So if you're from a minority group, if you're from a vulnerable group, and specifically if you are female and you are making your voice heard, specifically journalists and women in politics, you will be bullied offline. Now, the Commission has also done some snapshot research where we found that most of these women have just moved offline. They no longer share their views online, which makes it inauthentic, an inauthentic environment of discourse. It's the loudest men shouting at each other and just confirming the bias, and it's an echo chamber. So we are left, unfortunately, with this space that, yes, from a democratic values perspective, it does allow for you to actively participate and in realize your civil and political rights. But the aftermath of that is unfortunately what we are sitting with now. Now, you've asked, Kanyiso, what is it that the Human Rights Commission is doing? Well, none of our organizations, none of our response mechanisms, even if you speak about SAPS, the NPA, the Human Rights Commission, the IEC, none of us were designed for what we saw came with social media. It is an absolute, I'm going to use the word amplification as well, of the harms we see around in real life on a daily basis. It's just moved online now. Now, what we want to refer to when we speak about that is the evolution of human rights abuses. It has evolved from screaming at each other in the parking lot, keeping each other accountable to go and address it, perhaps, defamation. It has evolved and it is translated now online, whether it's GBV, whether it's hate speech or harassment. It lives and it flourishes online. What are we going to do about it? With very limited capacity, not only knowledge, but human resource. We are trying our utmost best from a promotion, protection, and a monitoring point of view. And that is why partners such as even my panel members are so valuable for the Human Rights Commission to demand accountability. Now, you would have private actors, and we've already mentioned some of the politicians here on the platform, or I'm not going to mention again because we are in the process of filing court papers. we demand accountability. We are not coming from a political point of view. We're not coming from trying to be popular on social media. We align ourselves with the parameters of the Bill of Rights. We align ourselves with what the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act of 2000 says. And that act demands you to demands from us to prevent hate speech, to hold those accountable who've been guilty or what we see as prima facie guilt in terms of harassment, who would incite violence against others based on what we call a prohibited ground. Now, that would be because you're a woman. That would be because of your race, your beliefs, your sexual orientation. And that's where we want to come in when we speak about a protection mandate. So we are regularly in court. Is it enough, Kanyiso? Can we react quick enough on every social media user? Can we be holding everyone accountable on all of the platforms when the amplification takes place so fast? The answer is unfortunately no. So we need to create a social media platform user that is not only aware of their own responsibilities, but also aware of what the mechanisms are to make use of when there is harassment online, defamation online, hate speech online. Now, thank you so much, William. You shared that social media charter. Kanyiso indicated that we were in Nelson Mandela University, and Sanelisiwe, it sounds like you were there as well, that we launched this charter because it's a user guide. We want to create a responsible user because we can't be everywhere, unfortunately. We want to be, we are trying, and that's why sometimes what we call is strategic impact litigation, so that we determine a precedent so that the harms do not continue to occur online. But we are at a precipice, unfortunately, to see whether the amplification of these harms are in fact controllable. Because what we've also seen, and the experts around the table, William specifically, would be able to speak to what disinformation online looks like. And whether you are able to curb it through addressing it directly, addressing it with the account, or whether you're just going to amplify that person's own audience and almost make them a martyr and make them more popular on the platform. So there is a balancing act. You've spoken and you've asked, sorry for taking so long, but in terms of the election around the corner. Now, last year, the Commission has also passed, and myself, I serve as the National Coordinator for Human Rights and Developing Technology. We issued a statement during the election cycle together with 30 other national human rights institutions across the globe, where we called for vigilance and awareness about the dangers that things like deepfakes, disinformation would pose during an election cycle. And that meant that partners such as William and MMA assisted us in training students, training members of the public, as well as the Human Rights Commission officials themselves, to be on the lookout for what harm online looks like during an election cycle. And we found that it was helpful. We had a live e-elections campaign during the cycle. We were then engaging with all stakeholders to see whether we can curb concerning conduct online and report it through the relevant structures in live, feedback time. I can tell you whether it worked, whether it not worked. They were challenges and certainly things that we can learn from. But the project itself is now being used at a global platform from the Global Network of Human Rights Institutions in Geneva as a success story. But it's certainly something that we need to strengthen in perhaps the local election cycle. It is going to again come to the fore, but I can tell you we had a report which is going to be released. We don't need to speak about the July unrest very much, but what we saw during the Walter Sisulu University unrest was a similar occurrence that happened during the July unrest. It was fake images being shared, deepfakes, and videos that were coming from other African countries, but which were purported to come from the unrest of Walter Sisulu University. Now that moved students from their rest to go to the streets and then participate in what they thought was an authentic protest. But at the end of the day, it was what we would refer to as fake news. Luckily, when we did the analysis of the social media feed, we saw that 86% of the participants on that platform, on X at that stage, called it out as fake. So there is an increasing awareness from our young people, from our social media users in respect of identifying disinformation and perhaps being even able to call it out. But Zaniwe and Sanelisiwe, you've mentioned, are we able to call it out? Do we have agency to call it out? And are we sometimes too scared to call it out because of the victimization that takes place in these echo chambers of harm? But let me stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will come back to you about it working or not. There is a question that I want to ask you with regards to that, about something that I saw on social media that's very, very important. But before I go there, I just want to bring in Sanelisiwe. I want your perspective on this, on the aspect that are we, from the negatives that we've seen with regards to social media campaigns, algorithms, digital mining, and all of that, are we at the bottom of the food chain as maybe Africa? Should we be scared of engaging in social media platforms and all of that? Or should we try and also embrace the positives in the political space, as we can see today that it has also made certain big topics in our political discourse very, very out there, put it out there for all of us. I'm speaking about your Zondo commissions. Today we have the Madlanga commissions. I mean, there are some news. We even managed to find out more about certain sofas of wealth that we have or couches of wealth that we have in South Africa. And sometimes that knowledge comes from social media. So should we be nervous because we are at the bottom of the food chain with regards to the knowing of the back end of it? Or should we try and embrace it, but with a sort of caution here and there?
We honestly need to be cautious of the information that goes out on social media. X, for instance, is a platform that is unregulated in terms of parody accounts. Although Elon tried to create some form of regulation with certain accounts do have parody on it, there are still accounts that are mimicking officials, politicians, or who are created to kind of like be that source of disinformation or misinformation as an insider of a political party. So that is something that we obviously need to be cautious of, because those are the accounts that genuinely, get the attention that needs to be there. In general, in the South African context and in the African context, everything that trends or something that is picked up that that people talk about is based on sensationalism. Now that's where we have an issue. Our news outlets do that as well. You'd see News 24 will clickbait on an article with a headline or a post copy or caption on social media. You click on it, behind the paywall, you'll see that whatever it is that they summarized on social is not the true nature or the actual content that you're actually going to receive. So our social media usage is very sensationalist. There is no ethical guiding in terms of what is published and posted on them, which is one of the biggest issues that we also have as well. It is so severely unregulated to the point whereby even the consumers of the information cannot even determine the difference between a sensationalist post or an actual informative post as well. So there needs to be, I would say, a high level of caution with the information that comes out. We need to start interrogating the information that we receive. We need to also question the information and the source that we receive as well, especially on social media. You'll find a high spread of messages because what happens is that someone's going to screenshot it, send it on WhatsApp. The whole country is up in arms. It's forwarded so many times. There's fake documentation that's spreading. There's all of these things that actually, get taken from social media and fed into other, platforms like WhatsApp, which is one of our biggest communication platforms, and people believe that whatever it is that they've received is the truth. So what we need to do is, number one, we need to get into the habit of interrogating the content that is out there. We also need to vet, even if it comes from an influencer or someone, of authority as well, because they too themselves put themselves in that position of being a voice, but they are also the perpetuators of misinformation because it suits the narrative that they want to bring. You find political parties used to do that at campaigning, where they be like, look at what your ANC is doing, look at what your DA, your UTMs, etc., etc. Now they're taking it online. Now there's AI as well that helps them push the narrative. There was a trending image last year of Cape Town, and it was an AI image. It was so realistic that no one could actually determine whether or not it was realistic. And people clicked on that thing, and it went massively, like, unregulatory, like, off the charts, only to find out that someone in the EFF, I believe, had created that AI image to kind of like push this narrative of how the DA governs Cape Town. So those are the kind of things that we honestly need to start interrogating. It took about 2 to 3 weeks for a correction to be made, because no one could actually find, when we asked for the locations and whatever else, no one could find the location. And then eventually, when everything was put together, it was found that it was an AI generated image. So we are in a very, very dangerous spot where there's a lot of unregulated things that are currently taking place online from a political point of view. And we're also finding that the same thing is happening when it comes to advertisements, etc., etc. We've got a gambling crisis in the country. No one is talking about it. We've got a casino in Cape Town, Grand West, where on average there's about 2 to 3 people that commit suicide at the parking lot because they've lost their entire salaries in gambling. But every single time you would open X, Facebook, Instagram, or even TikTok now, you're finding an advert that promotes gambling. So there's quite a lot of issues that we seem to have because the people who are in power are not regulating the entire thing. And when I say they're not regulating it, there is no kind of like standard or something to hold people accountable, not only for the content that they put out, the misinformation that they put out, but there's nothing that regulates where the buck stops as well. So it's a free reign currently. We need to be extremely cautious because you'll never know how far or the extent something is going to go and the impact and the effects it's going to have on an ordinary South African's life.
Thank you. Thank you. Speaking now about your strategic communication, I think is what is being implemented on this. We found that with regards to social media, people have found better ways to saying something. We were speaking about the aspect of language as well, and you were saying that with language, at times you find that the language becomes too complex, or they make it as simple as it can be for you not to see what happens on the back end and everything. But are we also not naive to a certain extent to say that we found instances where traditional media seems to be far away from ordinary people? And that's maybe why, to a certain extent, people have decided to trust social media, because there are certain days when you can get a notification about something before the 7:30 news speaks on it, or even days before they speak on it. So we found that there is a social disconnection in our society, especially looking at townships, looking at rural areas, when it comes to traditional media and social media. And any inputs on that, anyone? Sorry, you muted. Sorry. Just kindly unmute yourself if you can.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Apologies for that. So that's a great question that you've asked. To what extent does people looking at social media for this fast, rapid information, and obviously back in the day, and I say back in the day quite intently, I remember at some point there was literally no social media. We had Mixit, and it wasn't as viral as what WhatsApp is right now. And you wait for the news, you sit with your parents, and that's where you find everything. And I remember when I went to university, my mom would say, you must watch the news, there could be a civil war, or aliens could come down and you won't know anything. And that was a real thing, as in you genuinely had one source of information People were paid for it. There's a producer, there's a director. People have sourced through the information. Sometimes that information could be 24, 48 hours old. But it's gone through a stream. And what we've seen with social media now is that obviously there's this competing force. And with this competing force, a few things are happening. Number one, do you remember when they said Thabo Mbeki passed away? And we were also shocked. And this was like the news, the news that we trust. And we were just sitting there like, oh my gosh, what happened? And they were like, oh no, he didn't. And what social media has done is it's also sort of like created this pressure for traditional media to also want to be as fast, to want to be the first ones to, hit the press and to give out this information. And on the other hand, what it's done is it's allowed, if you remember Fees Must Fall or End SARS in Nigeria, you had young people taking their phones and, taking videos of what's happening, and it's live and it's raw. It's not fact checked. And not to say that it's not true, it is true, but the truth is, to each story, there are nuances, and you do need to sort of bring in different elements, and you need to ensure that what you're saying is not perpetuating a specific, story, or it's not polarizing a specific situation. So you find people saying, look, we understand that there are all these nuances around fact checking, around gathering all parts of the story, etc. But we want to know now, and we've really become this instant society in different ways. We see it with food, and we see it with education. We see it with all sorts of things. You want information now, you go online, you chat GPT everything, and we've really gotten to the point where now even people in the rural areas want to know what is happening via WhatsApp, and they want to be in the know. This information society that we've created, and I think Dr. Lynn, you said it so beautifully, that we've been part of the curation of this monster. And at what point are we going to say, okay, guys, we need to stop now? Or have we been so deeply entrenched and embedded in how we consume information? Now going back to your question, I think we need to create levels of accountability even for the individuals. And I think for the longest time, we've actually gotten away now with saying, well, it's an individual and we want access to information, etc., which I think is excellent. Without access to information, what we're essentially doing is we're perpetuating all the, the atrocities of the past, and we are essentially silencing people. But on the same sentence, we have to say, individuals, when you do take your phone out, and when you do share that information, you need to understand that could impact a life, that could impact a nation, that could create a war. I think people just don't understand the type of power they have in their hands with their cell phones. And it goes back to the literacy and awareness that I was talking about at the beginning, that we need to create, and I really like what Dr. Lynn said about, what she's doing right now in Namibia, and the work that is being done, that we are seeing a cohort of more woke or wiser social media, internet users, but we need more, because I don't think that's enough. And we were talking about 2030 coming up and having the largest youth populace in the world, right? This youth populace, if they do not get educated and we don't have a different approach, what essentially is going to happen is, like what William was saying, whatever, let's say, the likes of Trump or Elon Musk spew out on different platforms, that becomes truth. It becomes truth until something really bad happens, and then now we go fact check post facto. That is not something that we want. So it goes back to what I was saying: responsibility of the platforms, responsibility of the government. So that means dissemination to schools. If it means dissemination to churches or wherever we have a mass gathering of people, but also the individual. If this type of information doesn't go beyond, your business school, it doesn't go beyond the academics, it doesn't go beyond the elite and the bourgeoisies of South Africa, and the world at large, there's no point. We're just here with cute faces, a bit of makeup, the nice head wrap, and William with the comments, and it's a great conversation. It's an amazing one to be part of. But we need to go to grassroots level, and we need to have these conversations in native languages. And it takes me back to my ICASA days. We traveled the most rural of villages in this country. We spoke to chiefs, and we asked them for permission to speak to the people within the communities. And the questions that came out of this shows you that they are part of the ecosystem, but they're so disconnected from a rights perspective because they don't know right from wrong. They don't, these conversations, this is not second nature. And I think, at this level, whether it's academia or professional involvement or political involvement at a high level, we get so desensitized that everybody knows what's going on. And we speak about it, yes, that they don't. But in reality, the way we move, the way we invest our time when it comes to CSR projects, the way we do things really it's not tantamount to people that are having this discussion in real life. And I think it's for us to do more, but I think it's also for us to take ourselves into the outskirts, to the people, and have these raw, real conversations with real examples of how bad can be.
Thank you for that. I know in some institutions they do try to foster educational technology, or educational technologists, as the term is. But at the grass level of it, I think what you were emphasizing on is where we need to go. We need to have conversations even with kids at the elementary level as well about the implications of social media and social bullying as well, because we see a lot of kids going through that. Aurelian, I'd like to ask you a question. Looking at society as a whole, we spoke about society being in a complex ecosystem where it continuously changes. I mean, we came from churches being rulers, where we had rulers of one political party today to coalitions. Do you think society was bound to be changed, these democratic processes, by social media? Or something else was going to come even if it wasn't social media? So we should try and deal with social media as it is, because it's not going anywhere.
I mean, it's probably a little bit of both, which is, social media isn't going to go anywhere, and I guess on some levels we don't really want it to. And it's a bit like AI. I think the potential of all of these systems has been incredible. When the internet first arrived, we were all talking about, oh wow, it's going to be able to democratize communications. And guess what? It didn't. And then social media came, and they are all, again, the same thing. Hooray, it's going to democratize community. And now all you need is a cell phone. And what happened? It entrenched exactly the same inequalities. And in fact, what it has done is it served to concentrate power even more extremely in the hands of the tiny. The issue now isn't so much the social media platforms. It's more about the crises that democracy and the capitalist system itself is facing, which is that it's now perverted to such an extent that unless you are extraordinarily wealthy, the kind of society that we look to isn't going to favor you. Those of us on the call that are middle class, we're going to be increasingly crushed down towards the bottom. That gap between rich and poor is going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. And the consequence of that is going to be felt all over the world. What these social media platforms are doing now is making that worse. We see it already with AI. All of the experts, even Elon Musk, right? One of the most actively non-caring, couldn't give a flying backside for any other human being other than himself. Even Elon Musk was warning about the dangers of unregulated AI. What have they done? They've happily gone ahead with it. One of the first actions, sorry to mention him again, but it is an important reference, that Trump did when he came to power was he got rid of the AI guidelines that were there that Biden had passed. These are things that set out some of the ethical frameworks of principles that we have to abide by, if we're going to realize a society that isn't just identified by a tiny elite that control all of the access to resources, that shift and shape narratives as they so please. What we're seeing now on these social media platforms is that if you want to spread polarization, anger, fear, anxiety, you're actively rewarded in doing so. And that's a perverse thing, right? Not even, you'd have to go back to Nazi Germany and to apartheid to find a system that actively rewarded people for being evil and for being horrible. Yet, this is what these things do. Andrew Tate has been made incredibly wealthy because of his ability to monetize and use the algorithms. So you've got someone who's a poster child for hating women, for being not just sexist, misogynist, but charged with trafficking and violent assaults. He's making money off these platforms. That's their success story, right? So when you've got that as a system that's engineered to favor outrage, that's engineered to favor inequality, it's not engineered to say, if you're a woman and you have a view, we want to hear what it is, and we're going to actively favor the algorithm to make sure that we hear more women's voices on social media. Nope. But if you're a misogynist idiot male and you come on and you can say all the sorts of things, and you can go and use that platform to become famous like Charlie Kirk did, then you'll make a huge amount of money, as he did. That's how he got wealthy, from those shows that favored those algorithms. If you look at the recent podcast issues that have happened in South Africa, the controversies around them is because all they were doing was following the same playbook that social media algorithms follow, which is you go and you attack someone and you say something completely moronic or sensationalist or really offensive or misogynist, right? These aren't the kinds of things that are there. The thing that I think is going to save African societies and South Africa, as opposed to that, is that we actually understand the concept of community. Those systems are engineered around the individual. They're around the I, and they're around the me, and they're not around the we. And I think that what will save us is going to be that collective resistance that says, no, we don't want this. We've seen this borne out in examples. When South Africa could have gone to hell and burned in the 2021 riots that we saw, it was ordinary citizens that stood up and said, no, we're not going to allow this. Ordinary people went and protected malls. Ordinary people went and stood up against their neighbors and said, no, you're not doing this, not today, we're stopping this nonsense. Right? The police, the security services, they were somewhere doing Lord knows what, because they certainly weren't doing what they should have been doing at those moments when they should have been at their most effective. They started to gain control, but the point is it was the people that said no. Just as it was the people of South Africa that stood up and said, this apartheid nonsense, we're not going to stand for this nonsense. And that's what will save us. But this system as it stands, unless, as we do, as all of the speakers have said, unless we regulate, unless you bring in and empower young people and old people to deal with it, to identify content, we are just welcoming in a disaster that's going to see people being made more afraid, more polarized. Locally, there you go. There's another example. Operation Dudula started as a social media movement. It's now getting resources from where? But it's a social media movement because they're monetizing xenophobia and racism. How's that okay?
The more traction you have, the more trending you are, the more money you get on your account. Dr. Ellen, this is a very, very interesting conversation. I'm learning a lot from you guys as well here. I was watching News Africa, I think it was a week or 2 weeks ago, where an anchor was put into a deep fake account. And it was as if he was speaking from his own side, speaking on the news and everything at that. And obviously, I think now with the knowledge that I have with digital conversations, digital mining, I was able to see that it's a deep fake. But a part of me also, I was fearful that, we judge our parents that sometimes they fall for these tricks. And I'm thinking 10 years from now, it will be hard for us to even spot a quick deep fake in a matter of minutes or seconds to say that this is a deep fake. Because now, thinking about someone that you usually watch on the news on a regular being exposed to such, where you try to get relevant information about what's happening in the country, it does put a little bit of fear in you. But also, before you go on that, I would like you just to give us just a little bit insight, not too much, because we're about to close in a few, but a little bit insight of the maybe the issues that come out ethically that you've dealt with in the Human Rights Commission that we might not see from the background as ordinary South Africans, but you continuously try to handle for us as a country. Thank you.
All right. I think maybe let me give a few tips, if I can put it like that, because if we speak about deepfakes, if we speak about these violations that we feel are so new, we can actually just go back to the drawing board and see what legislation is available already to protect us in these instances. So I've made reference of the Equality Act previously. You're speaking about deepfakes. It's the Cybercrimes Act of 2020 that we can really reference when we speak about deepfakes. So the legislation is there, but what I like that you're saying is how do we get the knowledge to the people? Zanue mentioned how do we get the grassroots buy-in of conversations that we are having at a very high level. And I think mine would be to encourage everyone to go to the grassroots level. And certainly as the Commission, we are trying to do that as well. Once I had a recent conversation here about with colleagues from Uganda as well as Kenya, who we started off discussing where is the capacity needed. Is it needed at parliamentarian level so that we can get the right knowledge to the decision makers to enact laws, to push for regulation, have the right policies, and have the right conversation at that level. And it was very informative to see how the discussion just changed to say, no, in fact, no. We need to expect more from the decision makers. Capacitation is an own decision. If you have been appointed into a decision-making position, you need to be held to account if you fail to protect those that you have been voted or those that you represent. So perhaps it is time for us to bring the Social Media Charter, the Cybercrimes Act, the Equality Act, grassroots level, so that the community in Matatele can know that they have information to hold the decision makers to account for not protecting them when the next election comes and there's a fake news or a disinformation post to say, don't go vote at that voting station because there's no electricity. Now, what that would mean for Gugu Dlamini is she's not going to get into a taxi or she's not going to pay public transport to go and vote. It affects her civil and political rights. So for me, it's grassroots education. But I also just maybe one or two comments on where we are currently standing in terms of accountability on social media is our social media users in South Africa needs to be made aware that our laws stand. Whether the head of Twitter or X or Facebook decides to promote freedom of expression or the singular rights and the private rights that William has referred to, above the collective rights that as Africans in South Africa we are so proud of, then South Africans must know the law will still stand. I will still be able to hold you to account for hate speech if you use the K word. Although you think perhaps Elon Musk is going to come and save you, I will still take you to the Equality Court if there's harassment. I will still hold you to account for incitement if you speak as xenophobic and Afrophobia on social media, because I've got the law that protects us. We have a beautiful constitution that we fought for very hard. We have brilliant laws. Now it is us, our responsibility to implement them.
Thank you for that. You know, what I'm learning from these conversations as well is regulation, accountability, transparency, and lastly, education. The importance in all of that it's the only things that can save us in this political discourse that we're in. So yeah, it is a lot, and community as well, as William has said. So hopefully the future is brighter than it is today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time. If I can just give you 2 minutes, if possible, to give us your lasting remarks and where you see the future of our country going. Just 2 minutes, if I can start with you, Sanelisiwe.
I think that, look, our future is honestly dependent on how we vote. I can definitely tell you that. We cannot say that our future, we cannot forecast or foresee a future if we continue to make the same repetitive mistakes when it comes to voting. That's the first thing. And number two, I think, is that if we continue as society to be complacent as well, we also need to ensure that whoever it is that we're voting for and put into power is also equipped and prepared for what is currently happening in terms of social media, in terms of AI, etc. Dr. Carter mentioned, for instance, the rights that we actually have, and the legality and all of that stuff. That is a huge educational gap that is missing. That is something that, from not even a political front, but from a leadership perspective, you should be driving home. People will continue to be sensationalists and disregard all the rights that are entrenched in the Bill of Rights because the platform allows them to do so. We need to start having a form of an educational thing that will actually have to be at the grassroots level. We should not be going out to communities to speak to them when we need a vote or when we need something from them. We should be going out to them and have those imbuzos to educate and inform everybody, from the rulers of the Eastern Cape to the most suburbians in Clifton and Bantry Bays in Cape Town, because it's an across-board issue. So the sooner, I think, that we can, the webinar is all great and well, but as a collective in this country, we need to kind of like shy away from who's twerking and who's doing whatever else online, and actually start having these critical conversations whereby we also start to see the ramifications of things that you say online as well also take precedent. It should not take a Bonang to send somebody to court in order for us to know that such recourses exist. It should not be that level. We should have that level of understanding across the board. We should not know that legal is there because of the Madlaga commissions and whatever else. Those are the things that we actually need to start bringing to a grassroots level. We also need to make sure that this type of information is also accessible to all in the 12 official languages that we have as well, so that we're speaking to people so that they can fully understand and they can equip themselves. Because a trend is not necessarily about what somebody else says and whatever else. There are people who are being videographed and photographed for content unwillingly, and they're not aware of it. And they only find out when, Mang from church comes through and approaches you and whatever else. So for me, the future is dependent definitely on how we vote and also how we hold people accountability. That's the second thing. Number three, also how we then also envision how our online cycle is, as well as the country as a whole. And also just to be morally and ethically aligned as well, and also not to disregard the rights of the Constitution in that entire process.
Thank you there. We must have those uncomfortable conversations as a country. We must not shy away from them, and hopefully they will start at home. Zaniwe?
So before I give my final 2 minutes, I'll try and keep it short. This is a really good panel, by the way, and thank you so much for putting us together. And I think that this combination was great. And kudos to you guys for doing this just before Cybersecurity Month, because I think this is amazing. And honestly, if you want to do this again, I'm totally down to to doing it during Cybersecurity Month. But just to give, social media has changed everything. How we speak, how we mobilize, how we vote. And it's given us new power, but it's also amplified new harms, And what will determine Africa's future is not the technology itself, it's how we choose and whether we choose to regulate with courage and regulate our people at grassroots, and holding people to account, the politicians, the leaders, private sector, everybody. And we must remember this, that innovation without safeguards is not progress, it's exploitation, like what Dr. Elin said. If we want democracy that truly reflects our constitution, dignity, equality, and freedoms, then we must demand the same protections for Africans online that are afforded elsewhere. I mean, we see it with the Facebook cases. We see it all the time, and we're just like, oh gosh, we don't get that. And it's ridiculous because we don't get that, at international level. The lack of accountability is shocking. So the future is clear. By 2030, 75% of the world's youth will be African. We know this. And if we don't empower them with truth, literacy, and accountability, then the loudest voices of division will define our politics, the future of our world. But if we do, social media can be and will be transformative. and we transformed from a tool of manipulation to a platform for genuine participation, inclusion, and change. And that's our challenge, right? That's our task. It's almost like you look at what they say your task on earth. Whether you're religious, they say God has given you this task on earth, and that could be ours, right? I remember 2 weeks ago we were sitting in Harare at the UN African Women's Leadership Network intergenerational retreat. And the topic was on artificial intelligence and the participation of Africans. And Dr. Mlambo Muka said, if we are not at the forefront of this AI conversation, I think the social media conversation itself is included, we will just be a footnote in the history of AI and technology. So those are my parting words. Let's not be footprints. Let's make sure that we're at the forefront, and let's make sure that these things we're talking about, we're bullish about them, and do whatever it takes to get not just the discourse, but the solutions across the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Zangile. I think I lost William there. I don't know what happened to him. Dr. Carter?
Thank you so much, and also thank you for hosting us. I really enjoyed the discussions as well. We are only seeing the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately, and I think there's a lot of passion behind us speaking about these issues, and we need to do so more. This is not an issue we always speak about whether as a country, because we struggle so much with socioeconomic rights and with the realization of socioeconomic rights. How dare we speak about digital rights? Because it seems very far removed, and it's not. Digital rights is a conduit right. It's an enabler. It makes communities access and realize their rights. That is why it's so critically important that digital rights becomes a reality in a continent like ours. And exactly like Zaniwe said, we simply cannot afford to be a footnote. We need to be the drafters of our own trajectory when we speak about developing technologies. Now, in the meantime, I would encourage anyone to contact the Human Rights Commission when they do experience harms online to see if it perhaps is something that we can assist with. In the meantime, William would certainly also chime in and make use of platforms, tools such as Rule 411 to report online issues, report disinformation. Let us become an active citizenry, and then forecasting, because we don't want to be just looking at the negative. What is the power of the region? What is the power of the continent? And that is cooperation and coordination and collaboration. Without that, our power, and when you look at data, data is all about numbers, and power is in numbers. So what is our power? It's our numbers. If we can collaborate as a region, but let's start in South Africa, if we can collaborate as colleagues, if we can collaborate as organizations and civil society and have a proper oiled machinery, our voices will be amplified, and we will get to write the text of the next chapter in respect of AI, digital revolution, social media. And we should definitely not shy away from that. We've got the capacity, certainly, as you could have heard here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And community as well, as William had said. William, any last remarks?
Thanks, and thanks for convening the panel. Apologies if I made a little bit of it about that orange lunatic in America. I think it speaks to how incredibly biased our algorithms are, that so much of the content we receive is coming from North America, that they're influenced by the events there, and that speaks to us not telling our own stories nearly well enough. We still have to deal with the digital divide, which is that people still don't have access. I know you see figures of 70% internet access in South Africa, but there's no way that that's reliable and ongoing access for the majority of people, and certainly the majority of young people don't have access to the internet on an ongoing manner. So we are setting them behind by decades if we aren't giving them the basic tools, and we need to then be giving them the skills. The good news is, well, I know this because we work with 5,000 children a year from various schools across South Africa. That's the moment you give young people the opportunity and you give them the skills, they can shine, and they do shine. You know, so we are very optimistic in the face of overwhelming odds that actually we're going to be the ones that come out of this picture a lot better, provided we can do the things that all of the other speakers have said. You know, we've got to make sure that we exercise our vote, get out and vote. It doesn't matter who for, really, but get out and vote, and then get out and also just be a better person online. You know, don't fall for it. If you want to be horrible or say something horrible, go and speak to a cushion rather than doing it online. You're never gonna regret being nice online. You'll always regret being horrible. So that's the long and the short of it. You know, just be a nicer person, and you'll see that the world is a nicer place if you look at it with rose-tinted glasses. Thanks.
Thank you for that. You know, speaking about what our future looks like, I remember some words from John Phillips, who was speaking in COSAS. He used to say that the future is not a place we headed, but one that we are creating. And the road to it is not found, but it is made by us ourselves. And hearing you speak here today is telling us that the destination of where South Africa is going to go is in basically our hands and how we respond to what the world provides to us. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your time today. I'd like you to thank you for your knowledge as well today that you've provided for us. This was very, very insightful information, and we are very, very grateful as a school, not only as a school, but as a community as a whole. We also have a AI course at Regenesis. For those who are interested, please kindly look into our prospects. You find more information with that. And that's it from me. Thank you very, very much to everyone who has joined us today, and have a blessed day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Recordings.